Now you may ask why this time of year is so good for grafting, but first I want to tell you what grafting is. It's joining two plants together that are related, but maybe the one you're trying to propagate is the one that has some special quality, and it may be the only way to propagate a plant. That's the main reason for grafting. It doesn't root from cuttings and maybe it doesn't grow from seed. These apples are a good example where you want an exact clone of the same plant. It's also a really good way to put multiple varieties on one tree if you're limited on space. You can have 3 or 4 different varieties of apples all on the same tree. The reason this time of year is so good for grafting deciduous fruit trees is because they're still dormant or just coming out of their dormancy. You can see a lot of the buds are swelling, and that's the perfect time to graft these trees because the sugar and water flows are just starting this time of year, and they're pumping all these juice back into these branches, and it's going to make the grafting successful. It's also a lot cooler this time of year, so it's really important that the trees aren't going to be under stress because we're putting something together where it doesn't have a direct access to roots, so it needs to stay moist. And if you did this in the middle of the summer, it would probably dry out. On the other hand, if you're grafting tropicals, in the middle of the summer is when you want to do them because it's warm and humid, and that's what they want. So all you really have to do is decide where you want to put the graft. In this case, I've got a containerized apple tree, and I want to put multiple varieties on the tree. I want to put it somewhere sort of low on the branch, so all I want to do is sort of decide where I want to put it, and then I have my cut, and you can actually see in here there's a cambium layer, and that's just simply the area where all of the growth starts. It's a little tiny green ring that's right inside the bark. That's what we're looking for. And so I know I'm going to put my new piece of sign wood is what it's called, but it's basically the tree that you want to propagate, and I'm going to attach that right there. So I've already collected some sign wood from the garden today. Now, as far as access to sign wood, you can get this from another friend who maybe has an apple tree you want. Maybe your grandmother has a really good apple tree variety you have. Or sometimes you can even go to a nursery and just politely ask maybe if they can have a little snippet of some apple tree they've got or whatever fruit tree you want. The key here is we want to match up the size of the trunk because they need to be an exact match. So I want to pick a piece of the sign wood that matches the diameter or caliper, that's a botanical term, so that these are going to blend really well together. So the first thing I want to do is get these sort of tapered down to size. So we cut that away because we really only need a piece 3 or 4 inches long. And by the way, these guys are all nice and sterile. Earlier we took some rubbing alcohol and we just sterilized all the tools to make sure that there was no diseases on them, that they were just really nice and clean. It's really important when you're grafting. And we want to make sure not to touch any of these cut pieces because that's where the graft is going to take place, and we don't want any fungus diseases there either. We're going to match these up and make sure that it's the same caliper. That's a pretty good match, so that's going to work really well. And then for prep work, we just want to make sure we get our sharp grafting knife and then just cut in the middle of the branch. This is called a saddle graft or reverse saddle graft, and you just push gently on it, and it just opens up the branch just about the width of the blade, and you pull it away, and then all you have to do is get your sign wood and then do the same thing just in reverse. We want to take away material and sharpen this to a point on 2 sides, and it's really important that this be even and flat, and we're just tapering to almost just a point at the end, but just so that it looks like a reverse V. And you can kind of look, just keep going till it's nice and even. There, that looks pretty good right there. And you can actually see, we've got a nice V right there. And there's actually a good shot of the cambium layer in here too when it's cut on the diagonal. Then all we want to do is take this piece, maybe pry this one open just a little bit, and join those guys together. And we want to make sure that their cambium layers are matching up because that's what the critical point is. And then if you notice, this is a nice graft because the fact that this is pried open helps to push and close in on our sign wood, and that's where they're going to join together, and that's really what we want. Now at this stage of the game, what we do is we want something to join these together to make sure they're not going to get knocked around. In the old days, they used to use these grafting rubbers, and this is nothing more than just a rubber band that's been cut, and it's got a little bit of powder on it. And the way they did these was they just wrapped them around the cut, and they wrapped it around a bunch of times just to make it tight. These are hard to find though. And then you can also use just electrical tape if you've got that handy. You just wrap it around the cut and you make sure it's good and tight. Disadvantage of electrical tape though is that it doesn't break down in the sunshine, and you have to make sure that you take this off within a couple of weeks, or else it could actually damage the graft that you've got going on. Personally, I like using this stuff from the medical industry. It's called parafilm, and it's just sort of a wax tape, and all you really want to do is just cut a small piece of it. It doesn't really take much, and it's got a little backing on it, and it's sterile, so that's really good for grafting, and it's sort of stretchy. It stretches and opens up, and then you take that, you wrap it around your sign wood, and if you notice this stuff, you just stretch it as you go, and you want to pull it tight because we're trying to exclude air from this graft, and we want to make sure that it's just really tight and it's pushing down, and as you stretch it, it also attaches to itself, so there's no other fastener. It's sort of quick and easy, and the stuff's actually pretty inexpensive. You can get it online on the internet. A lot of times you can get it from rare fruit societies too. And then the last thing we really want to do is just to make sure that this sign wood doesn't dry out. We've got a couple different options. If it's in a container like this, you can just put it in a shady area of the yard. That's going to help that this doesn't dry out. If it's out in the garden, you might want to put a plastic bag around this to make sure that the humidity level stays high, but you got to make sure it's out of the sun, so you might need to put a piece of shade cloth or something over it, poke a few holes in the bag to make sure it breathes. But one of the easiest things to do is to just use some of this paraffin wax. And you can get this in the supermarket. They use it for canning, and I've just used it on this hot plate that people use to keep their coffee warm, and I've just used some paraffin wax in here, and you just sort of paint it on your sign wood. And what that's going to do is it's going to help it from dehydrating, and you just go all the way up. You just go ahead and paint the whole thing all the way up to the tip, and the buds on the graft can go push right through the grafting wax without any problem. And this isn't so hot that it's also going to burn either, because it just sort of keeps it at that nice warm temperature of coffee. And you just paint it all the way up, and there's really nothing to it. From that point, it just takes about 3 to 4 weeks for it to grab, and you'll know it's made it if you start seeing these buds swell and start to grow. But you do have to be careful for about 6 months or a year until the wood really forms in there, and then you know you're good. And then you just can keep doing this multiply all over the plant. You can see I've already done it over on this one. So already I've got 3 different varieties on this tree. And the last thing that's really important is to label your grafts. So we want to make sure that we get a label on there, because it's really easy to forget where that graft is. And when you're pruning the tree in the wintertime, after a while you can't even see the graft, and it might be hard to remember where your grafts took place, and you don't want to prune away all your good grafted varieties. So you can do that. You can just graft as many apple varieties on this as you want, and you can have this really cool multiple, they call them fruit cocktail trees because there's so many on them. And it also adds to the advantage of the tree that you get cross-pollination on the tree, and usually you get better yields. It's a great tip for small gardens. The important thing to remember about grafting is that you have to stay within the same genus of plant. And the genus is nothing more than the first name of the botanical name when you see it on the tag. Unfortunately, that means that you can't run out to your garden and graft a great new hibiscus variety onto your juniper tree. But within the same genus, anything goes. And while I showed you only one grafting technique, there is tons more out there. If you're interested, pick up any book on propagation. They should have detailed lists of different types of grafts you can make. And hey, go online. There's great information there too. Okay, the only thing we need to do for our freshly grafted tree is to find a spot in the garden where it's going to be kind of shady and cool so that these grafts can take. In a couple of weeks, the buds will begin to swell and the graft will begin to grow, and that's when you can know that you can put it out in the sun. Remember, the trees out in the garden that you can't move to the shade, just shade those grafts with a little piece of shade cloth. That should be enough to keep them cool until they take too.